chemicals in our everyday products, from things like our soap and shampoo, plastic bottles, makeup, carpeting, mattresses, are showing up in the blood and urine of most of us. These chemicals, most of which are untested for safety, are even found in mother's milk and, disturbingly, in the blood of newborn babies. My guest today is on the forefront of measuring the impact these toxic chemicals have in our bodies. It's known as biomonitoring, a term you'll be hearing more and more about in the years to come. Cheryl Patton is director of the Health and Environment Program and the Biomonitoring Resource Center at Commonweal Institute in Bolinas, California. She worked with Mount Sinai Medical School and the Environmental Working Group to design and implement one of the first independent biomonitoring projects, which helped raise public awareness about levels of toxicants in the human body. Among those tested were environmental justice activists, health professionals, senior staffers at Google, as well as Bill Moyers and Andrea Martin, founder of the Breast Cancer Fund. Cheryl helped create the Collaborative on Health and Environment, which explores the scientific links of environmental threats to our health. One of the projects she developed combined human biomonitoring with air monitoring to explore pesticide exposures to an agricultural community during peak spray months, and the results were used to establish spray-free zones around schools, health clinics, and homes. She's currently a member of the advisory group for the World Health Organization's Breast Milk Biomonitoring Project. Welcome to Your Supernatural Life, Cheryl.
Thank you, Beth, for this opportunity to talk with you a little bit today.
Oh, I'm thrilled that you're here. So, diseases and conditions like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, learning disabilities are on the rise. Can you give us an idea about how big a problem this is in the U.S.?
Oh, it's a huge problem. You've probably seen some of the statistics, but the EPA estimates that something like 1 out of every 50 8-year-old boys is now someplace on the autistic spectrum.
That's extraordinary.
And something like 17% of children in school now in the U.S. has some kind of developmental disability. So these are really significant statistics.
Yeah.
We don't see these statistics in 25-year-olds or 35-year-olds. So
Uh-huh.
I'm deeply concerned about what happens when these kids graduate from high school. What kind of other training do they have? What kind of jobs? What kind of independent living situations? Are we going to be prepared for a whole new generation of people that don't really think the same way that humans have been thinking about problem solving and connecting with other humans in past generations?
That's a really interesting thing to think about. It's kind of shocking and disturbing. And I'm wondering, has there been conclusive evidence that points to the fact that chemicals are playing a role in these disabilities?
Well, yes, I think actually it has. There has been some conclusive evidence that I can tell you about, at least one study. But I just wanted to say first that these are very complicated diseases.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't really understand what causes them to occur or the trajectory of these kinds of diseases. It's complicated. It has to do with a lot of factors that probably interplay with each other, having to do with things like nutrition, genetics, things like this.
Mm-hmm.
But we do know that toxic chemicals play a role in all of this. There are a lot of chemicals out there that we are exposed to on a daily basis that have been shown in animal studies and some human studies to cause neurological harm.
Mm-hmm.
And let me just give you a couple examples.
Okay.
There's a class of chemicals called persistent organic pollutants, POPs chemicals, and they include chemicals like DDT, some flame retardants, and other pesticides. And lindane is is a POPs chemical. Now, these chemicals are considered to be endocrine-disrupting chemicals. That means that when they are taken in by the body recognizes them erroneously as hormones. Mm-hmm. And so because the body recognizes the hormones, they're able to trigger all kinds of deleterious physiological events within the body that shouldn't be happening. So POPs chemicals are the kinds of chemicals that go into our bodies, and they head for oil wherever there's fat in the body. So, and then they take up residence there for years. They last a long, long time.
Uh-huh.
So that means if a woman is pregnant, these chemicals are able to go, unfortunately, into the fetus over the placental barrier. And in the developing fetus, there's not a whole lot of fat, except right around the trimester when the brain starts to develop.
Oh.
So, of course, these chemicals head towards the brain.
For the brain, of course. Oh.
Yeah.
Interesting. And we're not talking about a huge dose of these neurotoxic chemicals. We're talking about infinitesimal amounts can have these effects. Is that
Absolutely.
true?
We used to think that the dose makes the poison,
mm-hmm.
that the more you were exposed to a chemical, the more you were likely to have some kind of health outcome that you wouldn't like. And that's still true in a sense, but we're finding now that very small levels can also affect people. Let me just tell you about another study that was done by Julia Herbstrom at Columbia University in New York. She and some other folks wanted to look at exposures to flame retardants to women and consequently their babies, pregnant women and their babies, right after September 11th, the World Trade Towers. And they were expecting to find elevated levels of a flame retardant called PBDEs, polybrominated diphenyl ethers. And what they found out, they had measured cord blood. They found out that the levels of PBDEs were not particularly elevated. But then they followed the children's development, and they found that the children, in fact, that had slightly higher levels of PBDEs had impaired intellectual capacities and physical abilities, which is really stunning. This is one of the first studies that was able to measure PBD exposure on how children think and how they move through the world.
And how old were the children when they were measuring?
They measured from 1 year to 3 years, and also again at 6 years. And this is at levels of exposures that are not particularly elevated. These are levels of exposures that we're all carrying in our bodies.
Uh-huh.
So this is really scary to me. It's true that flame retardants, PBDEs, a couple of different kinds, have been taken off the market in the United States, and of course they are completely banned in the European Union. Mm-hmm. But there's always some exemptions for these kinds of taken off the market or bans, and they continue to be imported, we think. And because they last so long in the environment, we're still breathing them in. We expose to PBDs mostly through dust, household dust, it turns out.
Right. So
it's as you might expect, because kids are crawling around on the floor and picking up things and putting them in their mouths more than others. This kind of studies that the Centers for Disease Control has done has shown that kids have much higher levels of PBDEs than adults. Uh-huh. And then just looking at PBDEs exposures in the U.S. compared to European studies, we have in this study something between 7 to 35 times higher levels of PBDs in our bodies.
Wow, that's extraordinary. And another reason why it's good to even small thing, just take your shoes off before you come into your home, especially if you have carpeting and small children. You just don't want to be tracking in all this stuff.
Yeah. You take off your shoes, you vacuum a lot with really good vacuum cleaners.
Right.
And you do what you can. Mm-hmm. But I think ultimately, it's very important to do these kinds of things. But ultimately, we have to change the way the laws are made.
Yes, I agree. If you're just joining us, I'm speaking with Charlotte Patton on Your Supernatural Life here on Green 960. For podcasts of this show, go to YourSupernaturalLife.com. Well, Charlotte, let's talk a little bit about biomonitoring. Can you explain what it is and tell us a little bit about some of the studies that you've developed where volunteers had their bodies tested for chemicals?
Oh, I'd love to. Biomonitoring is the assessment of human exposures to what we call environmental chemicals. And environmental chemicals are just the chemicals we would be exposed to in the environment. Some of them occur naturally, lead and mercury, and of course some are created by human beings. And there's been an explosion of these kinds of chemicals, man-made chemicals, since the late 1940s. And so they're fairly ubiquitous in our environment. And we found that very few of the chemicals that are out there in use and the kinds of products we use on a daily basis have been fully tested for their toxicity on humans. So Bill Moyers was doing a documentary called Trade Secrets a few years ago, and a group of nonprofit organizations got together and tried to organize it, and did so successfully, viewings across the country, because Trade Secrets had to do with a facility in the Deep South that was manufacturing PVC, and the workers were getting very ill with different kinds of cancers, specifically brain cancers. So part of his documentary included piece of research that we actually participated in which he had his blood and urine tested for the presence of toxic chemicals. And when the documentary was shown, I'm not sure how much of the documentary people really remembered, but everybody was fascinated by the scene where his blood was drawn, and then secondly, when he received the results of what was actually found in his blood and urine,
Mm-hmm.
which turned out to be, dozens of toxic chemicals. So he had been part of a small cohort we had put together with Environmental Working Group. We wanted to see how it felt like to be biomonitored.